Um, you have probably heard, as I have heard, that the old story about you put a frog in a kettle of cold water and you heat it up, and eventually the frog will boil because it doesn't have the sense. That's actually wrong. Frogs have a certain internal temperature. When things are dangerous, they will jump out of the pot. Unlike us. Because we are constantly rationalizing or justifying how things can be. In the Hebrew Bible, it is called the hardening of the heart. It is this. We are asked to do something small. And like a word, it changes us. And then what happens is we begin to defend the choice that we have made and go deeper and deeper and deeper into it. During the Nazi occupation of Germany, there was up on toward the French and German border. There was a small town there, and there was a minister that had a church. And what was interesting is this minister and his church saved thousands of lives because they wouldn't accommodate the things that were happening. Because first thing that happened is the Nazis came in and said, "Give us the names of all the people who are of Jewish descent." And the minister said, "Nope, we're not doing that." And because they didn't do that, the next things that came after them, "Nope, we're not doing that," and "Nope, we're not doing that." But what happens is we subtly make a compromise. Have you ever done this yourself? You all of a sudden make yourself a compromise about something, and then the next thing you know, you go deeper into it because you have to accommodate what you were saying. And then we go deeper into it, and we're kind of watching that in our world, in our country today, as the game getting more and more severe, but we keep accommodating what it is, and we're watching how the language begins to change. There's a television show that I absolutely love. It's probably my favorite thing on television. It's called All Creatures Great and Small. Anybody watch that on Masterpiece Theater? I love this show. And I love this show because it is so, first of all, it takes place in England during the period between the two great wars. And it's very pastoral. It's about a couple of group of veterinarians that sort of work together in this small rural English town. And it reminds me in many ways visually of the world that Tolkien would have lived in, because this is where he lived and this is what he wrote about and this was the thing that was in there. But the stories are all pretty much the same formula. Someone in the group does something stupid, and that kind of gets everybody in a tizzy of things are happening, and there's chaos of one form or another and a danger or something, and then someone points out, you were really being kind of a dick about the whole thing that was going on, and then they correct themselves, and everybody learns the lesson, and everybody is happy. Because the power in that story is this Greek word called metanoia, which means to change direction or to say, I was wrong. I thought this was a good idea at my highest wisdom, and now upon reflection upon it, it wasn't so smart for me to do. And the freedom that comes from that simple metanoia frees us from the trap that we fall into of the hardening of the heart, of how things begin to spiral out of control and how things become more and more crazy as they happen. And we can listen to it and we can watch it, because at what point do we say enough? Do we say enough when mothers and nurses are murdered, and yet it's called domestic terrorism? Or when we steal resources from other countries and call it liberation? Or when we call gunpoint diplomacy the opportunity of global expansion for everyone. And where does this end? Because it keeps getting up. The latest thing is what? Just give us your voter rolls and we will leave your city. Because we all know where these things kind of end, right? And at what point do we have a metanoia? And what I want to offer to you is something that so Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a great theologian, social activist in Germany, was eventually murdered by the Nazis. But he wrote an article 10 years after. It was a really interesting guy because he actually had friends who got him out of Germany. He came to New York. He was totally inspired by the Black Church of Harlem, totally inspired by this whole thing that was happening, true liberation theology, but said, I've got to go back because I can't be part of the German Reconstruction if I'm sitting it out over here in the US. So he went back to Germany. He was eventually arrested and hanged a week before the liberation. But 10 years after the rise of the Nazis, he reflected on what was going on, and I want to share a little bit of what he wrote. He said, stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good. One may protest against evil. It can be exposed and, if need be, prevented by use of force. Evil always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion, in that it leaves behind in human beings at least one sense of unease. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears. Facts that contradict one's prejudgment simply need not be believed. In such moments, that stupid person even becomes critical, and when facts are irrefutable, they are just pushed aside as inconsequential, as incidental. In all this, the stupid person, in contrast to the malicious one, is utterly self-satisfied, and being easily irritated becomes dangerous by going on the attack. For this reason, greater caution is called for than with a malicious one. Never again will we try to persuade a stupid person with reasons, for it is senseless and dangerous. So he is not talking about intellectual inferiority. He's not talking about people with low IQ. He is talking about the person who has surrendered their own capacity for reason and consciousness to something else. And they can be very good people on any other thing. We have people in our neighborhood as we walk by, we know what political spectrum they are in, and it's not the one that we would lean towards, and yet we wave and our dogs look at each other and we smile and things like that. They are good people, more or less. There are people who are very, very good at certain things, and yet they may be a racist or a sexist or a this or a that. And it's baffling because it's not like they're bad people, but there's this deep sense of misguidedness that carries things through. You know what I'm talking about here? Have you experienced this one? And so we want to label them as evil, but they're not. They're decent people who want what we want, but they have been influenced because they have advocated their own, like we can do, on the same way, by the way, because this isn't a right or left thing. It's who's in charge here between your two ears. Where are you being influenced, and how did that, and where does that go? And how do we affect that? What we've been talking about here is what it means to live a principle and intentional life, to live by intention, not necessarily by, but not going for intentions, but living intentionally. What does that mean? What does that mean to allow ourselves to stand for the good, the true, and the beautiful, to live for this idea of just, to practice discernment, and something that Jesus says to, in time, pray for our enemies, to stop the madness of where it goes. Which brings me to another frog story, one of my favorite frog stories. So one day in the froggy pond, there was a frog that was out and about with his froggy friends, and he fell into a wagon rut. And there he was in the wagon rut, and his friends were gathering around, and they were offering him advice on how to do it, and he was trying to climb up, and then he'd slide back down, and one thing happened, and he just could not get out of this wagon rut. And so finally, the evening is coming, and his friends say, man, we hope for the best, but we got to get back to the pond. And they go. And they hear the coach coming down the road. And it's a very anxious night in the frog pond as the coach comes and goes. And they wonder what's up. And so with great fear and trepidation in the morning, they get up and they make their way to the frog pond, not knowing what they're going to find. And there's their friend Froggy, and he's out sunning himself on a rock as pleased as could be, just lounging. And they're like, what happened? And he said, the coach came and I ran out of excuses. Kind of like us. At what point do we stop making excuses? Here's a fun little game to play with yourself at home. What is the line that you draw on? What is your red line? Is it murdering people on the streets? Is it occupying other countries? Is it getting voter rolls? Whatever the case may be, is it lighting things on fire? What is your red line where you say, enough, enough, enough? And what is the action then that begins to take? What is yours to do? I can't answer that for you. I can tell you what I'm doing. In the letters that I am writing weekly, my emails to the governor of my state, the congressman who represents me, the people who want to run for president or take political action, I am asking this simple question. How do you expect to save democracy when you won't even acknowledge a genocide? Asking for a friend. How do we expect somebody who is doing the same old thing and saying what we need is more of the same, and that somehow or another that's going to fix it? I can't answer that question for you. But for me, how can anyone look me in the face straight and say, I am here to save democracy? Oh, but that genocide over there that we have funded and participated in, I want to talk about that. How do we do that? At one point, how do we live intentionally? At one point, what do we say? When do we say to ourselves, you know what? The coach is coming, and I'm out of excuses. Thank you.